Good afternoon. My name is Taylor Augustin, and I'm a student at WGU in the Health Informatics program. Today I'll be giving a brief presentation on the unfortunate state of medical marijuana in the USA. So let's get started. Starting out, the American public strongly supports medical marijuana. In 2010, the Pew Research Center conducted a survey of voting age Americans and found that 73% say they favor their state allowing the sale and use of marijuana for medical purposes. With that type of support, you'd think that in 2017, medical marijuana would be sold at your local Walgreens. But, unfortunately, that's not the case. Today, only 28 states plus Washington, D.C., Guam, and Puerto Rico have comprehensive medical marijuana programs. While comprehensive medical marijuana programs are by no means perfect or comprehensive, in a nation that's seen marijuana as a dangerous drug since the late 1930s, it's moving in the right direction. So, my main points. Number 1. Marijuana is an effective medication. Number 2, the patchwork of laws regarding the use of marijuana or medical marijuana in the U.S. is inadequate, inaccurate, and disenfranchises millions of Americans. So, back to number 1. Marijuana is an effective medication. Looking through history, there is a ton of anecdotal evidence of marijuana being used for its medicinal properties. Today, though, clinical research is just starting to demonstrate unequivocally that marijuana has a multitude of medicinal properties that can be used in therapies. So, starting with history. The written history of marijuana begins in 1500 BC, or the 15th century, where it was found in the Chinese pharmacopoeia, the Re-Ya. Marijuana was used for many ailments and was finally written down in the Re-Ya. Probably the next biggest written reference to marijuana being used medicinally is found in the Pensao Ching, which was a compendium of drug recipes based on the traditions and formulations available during the rule of Shen Nung, an ancient Chinese emperor from around 1 AD. In the Pensao Ching, marijuana was indicated for treatment of over 100 ailments. Moving forward, 1849 years to 1850, we actually see marijuana get added to the U.S. pharmacopoeia and was recommended for a multitude of ailments, including neuralgia, addiction, and convulsive disorders. These are still afflictions that marijuana can be used to mitigate. But what is it about marijuana that makes it an effective medication? It's cannabinoids. Cannabinoids are the active chemicals in marijuana and are responsible for the medicinal effects that marijuana has. There are at least 70 agreed upon cannabinoids in marijuana and 8 to 10 major cannabinoids that are the ones that we've identified and provide the most medical benefit so far. Cannabinoids are unique because each one has its own pharmacological properties that can be used therapeutically. I've attached a document called the Ailment Guide, and it was provided by SC Labs, an independent analytical institution that profiles cannabinoids, which demonstrates the pharmacological properties of the major cannabinoids. So here we can see the major cannabinoids on the right in the columns, and the rows we see specific ailments that marijuana can manage or mitigate or treat. As you can see, it does run the gamut from just relieving pain and aiding in sleep to being a neuroprotective and protecting the nervous system from degeneration. There aren't many chemicals that have that wide of an array of effects, which is what makes cannabinoids so unique. But cannabinoids are so effective that they've been used in some of today's pharmaceuticals. On one hand, we have fully synthetic cannabinoids found in drugs like Marinol. Marinol uses synthetic THC, which is one of the major cannabinoids that naturally occurs in marijuana. It's used to treat nausea and vomiting, as well as stimulate appetite in cancer and AIDS patients in North America, and it treats neuropathic pain in MS in Denmark. On the other hand, though, we have naturally occurring extracted cannabinoids in drugs like Sativex. Sativex uses THC and CBD that was naturally extracted from marijuana itself to treat neuropathic pain and spasticity in MS patients in the UK and much of Europe. Awesome, right? Well, not so much. Unfortunately, the patchwork of laws regarding the use of medical marijuana in the U.S. is inadequate, inaccurate, and effectively disenfranchises millions of Americans. How is that possible, though? Didn't we just learn that marijuana is a medicine? Well, it is, but not in the U.S. So in 1911, marijuana prohibition began in the U.S., with Massachusetts becoming the first state to outlaw cannabis. Shortly thereafter, additional states moved to outlaw marijuana, and in 1942, marijuana was removed from the U.S. pharmacopoeia entirely, in spite of opposition from the American Medical Association. Prohibition culminated in the classification of marijuana as a Schedule I drug in 1970 as part of the Controlled Substances Act. So what does that mean then? Well, marijuana is classified as a Schedule I substance under the Controlled Substances Act, which alleges, inaccurately, that it has a high potential for dependency and no accepted medical use, and is therefore federally illegal. However, 28 states plus Washington, D.C., Guam, and Puerto Rico have comprehensive medical marijuana programs. Are you confused yet? Because I really am too. And, lo and behold, so is the rest of America. So, why does this make a difference, though? What's the big deal? It's a big deal because of the opportunity cost associated with the poor legal framework of medical marijuana in the U.S. Opportunity cost is defined as the loss of potential gain from other alternatives when one alternative is chosen. In the case of medical marijuana, the opportunity cost is staggering, and it's seen in three separate areas, actually two which kind of flow into the third. The first is loss of tax revenue. The second is the inability to openly research potentially life-saving therapies. And the third is disenfranchisement of millions of Americans. So, touching on number one, the loss of tax revenue. According to Ted Hessen in an investigative piece for online publisher Fusion, how much do states make from medical marijuana? Medical marijuana provides substantial tax revenues for states that have enacted comprehensive medical marijuana programs. The medical marijuana tax revenue graphic that's displaying shows estimates of tax revenue from just 8 months of existing gross sales data of medical marijuana in a few states with their current sales taxes applied. These numbers are from 2013 and 14. Now, looking at the chart, it's hard to ignore the amount of money that can be raised and taxed by legalizing, regulating, and taxing medical marijuana. In fact, in California, there's estimated 109 million reasons that they legalize marijuana and why it'll stay legal there. But if that's not enough, there's always number 2. The inability to openly research potentially life-saving therapies. The Schedule 1 classification of marijuana means that the U.S. government does not recognize any medical use for marijuana. Because of this, it's prohibitively difficult to conduct additional research on marijuana. In fact, research on additional therapies using cannabinoids is stymied through the lengthy and arduous cannabis research application process that requires approval from multiple government agencies, including the DEA, which maintains the position that cannabis has no therapeutic use whatsoever. All of this leads to the disenfranchisement of Americans with serious medical conditions. The sad state of marijuana laws in the U.S. forces these patients to either forego using cannabis medicinally, even when it is indicated for their condition, or illegally obtain cannabis and face the risk of prosecution, impure or unsafe medicine, and social stigmatization for illegally using cannabis. Okay, so great. But what do you want me to take away from this presentation? So, going over the main points one more time. Number 1, I want you to know that the potent cannabinoids found in marijuana have enormous medical potential, both when consumed individually and holistically. The cannabinoids in marijuana make it an effective medication. Number 2, the current legislation regarding the use of cannabis for medicinal purposes is confusing, inaccurate, inadequate, or non-existent, untenable, and most important of all, does not meet the needs of the American people. So, once again, these 2 items lead to the disenfranchisement of millions of Americans with health conditions that could benefit from the use of cannabis. Because cannabis is an effective medication, and because federal law prohibits marijuana use and state laws, they're just inadequate. Unfortunately, people who would benefit from therapies with cannabinoids are unable to partake and actually feel better. So that's it. That's my presentation on medical marijuana. I just wanted to say real quick why this matters to me. Medical marijuana is important because I myself have a extreme medical condition. It's called MS. It's really unpleasant. But living in Wisconsin and being unable to use cannabinoids or marijuana to basically deal with my condition leaves me feeling very disenfranchised, and it's not okay. So, alright, thank you. Goodbye.